All right, so you might be asking yourself as well, how did I come up with these rankings? It was a combination of holistic defensive stats along with pass rush stats, along with secondary stats. I also made up one of my stats for secondaries as well because it was kind of hard to find really good ones that I thought helped rank them effectively. Also looking at free agency moves, looking at draft picks, and also kind of just projecting a little bit based off of cohesion and all the other stuff I already mentioned before. Alrighty, so hopping back into the rankings, 5 through 1 for the defensive units and projections going into 2025. At number 5, we have the Baltimore Ravens. They actually led the NFL in rush yards allowed per game at just above 80 yards per game. It goes without saying that the biggest concern for the Ravens to improve on going into 2025 is their defensive secondary, because obviously their run defense is elite and number 1 in the NFL, at least last season it was, and I don't expect to take a huge downturn this coming season. It wasn't until about mid-season that Kyle Hamilton was moved to safety. That transition, that move bolstered that Ravens secondary, improved that unit, and just improved the defensive output for the Ravens overall. So this year in the draft as well, the Ravens added Malachi Starks from Georgia to their secondary unit. So now you're going to have another quality starter or quality depth piece at the corner position. The other big move this offseason for the Ravens that I'm sure everybody knows about by now that allowed me to put them in the top 5 of defensive rankings going into 2025 was the addition of Jair Alexander from the Packers. As far as I'm concerned, Kyle Hamilton, Malachi Starks, Jair Alexander automatically makes the Ravens defensive secondary a top 5 unit just with those 3 players. The biggest issue that I'm concerned about with Jair, though, I think for him, it's a little bit under half of his seasons he's been able to play 14 or more games. So that is slightly concerning for the Ravens if they're not able to have him for a decent chunk of the season. Again, Malachi Starks probably will come along towards the end of the season. So maybe if Jair plays the beginning, gets hurt, maybe it kind of works out time-wise, or maybe it's close enough together that it's really not that big of a deal. I guess we'll have to see how that kind of plays out. They also added more depth to their pass rush in the second round as well, so they're also bolstering that defensive front. That is the reason why it was pretty easy to rank the Ravens at number 5 in my defensive ranking projections going into 2025. Okay, another one of those where people are going to hate my pick, but it is what it is. You Steelers fans and you at number 4 Eagles fans can get together and go in the comments and tell me how horrible my rankings are. I will acknowledge last season the Eagles either had the best, if not the maybe second or third best defense in the entire NFL, bar none. Statistically speaking, they stood out in pretty much every category. The biggest issue I have with the Eagles is we can't just look at last season and be like, oh, yep, they're going to do it again. That's clearly how it's going to go. What we need to realize, one, is that this defensive unit last year was on a tear. They were outpacing pretty much every other defensive unit, regardless of talent, skill, or ability. I think they just got on a hot streak, much like offenses do who go to the Super Bowl. They kind of just start clicking at a higher level. The other reason why I can't project the Eagles to be, again, number 1 or number 2, and I have them at number 4 as, again, kind of like a safe hedge, is the amount of loss of talent that this defensive unit had in the offseason. And I know people are going to say, oh, you know, they draft so well, blah, 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 blah. Sure. You can say that all day, and I understand what you're saying. But when you have guys that are top 5, top 10 at their position in the NFL leave your team, for you to think that a first, second, or third round pick in the draft is going to immediately start the season or even necessarily finish the season as top 5, top 10 at their respective position is kind of insane. I do believe, even with the departure of these players, the Eagles' defense is still going to be great. It really is. That's why they're in the top 5. It's not even a question. I just feel that they're not going to play at the same level. So I comfortably am going to put them at number 4 on my defensive rankings going into 2025. At number 3, I have the Minnesota Vikings. So realistically for me, as far as defenses go, the Vikings were actually one of my favorites to watch, and I am not like a Vikings fan or like an NFC North fan. I am just saying like that defensive unit was great to watch. 1, because they played at such like an elite high level, but 2, there wasn't a lot of big name players on that defensive unit. It was more of a collective, a lot of like just guys who came together with a good DC and Brian Flores, who had a good scheme, who blitzed well. So last year, the Vikings were second in third down conversion percentage allowed. So basically, they just did not let people convert on third downs. They also ranked second in rushing yards allowed per game as well. When I watched the tape of the Vikings defense, it was pretty clear you weren't going to be able to run the ball on them. I knew when I played fantasy football, I didn't want to start my running backs against their defense either because they were not going to get over 60, 70, 80 yards. It just wasn't going to happen, realistically speaking. The one issue, I guess, or the one fault I can find for the Vikings last season was because of their blitz packages and because of them playing so much cover one, there was opportunities for teams to go deep or take passes underneath and get guys one-on-one, and that's a lot of times they would beat those matchups, which again is represented by the fact that they were 17th overall in the league for yards allowed per game. In free agency this season, they added pieces on the defensive line, but they did really add depth and starting quality talent to their secondary to kind of like reduce the amount of yards they're giving up after catch and reduce the amount of times that players are able to break bigger plays on their defense, especially when they are blitzing the quarterback. And obviously adding depth and adding talent on that defensive line through free agency as well is only going to speed up the amount of time it takes to get to the quarterback, which gives their secondary more time too. So like kind of works in tandem for them, kind of how they're approaching it in free agency. I would be shocked if the Vikings fell out of the top 5 as far as defensive units go in 2025. At number 2, I have the Denver Broncos. So as far as I'm concerned, the Broncos have a legitimate argument to be ranked as the number 1 defense going into 2025. Last season, they were first in defensive expected points added per game. There's not a lot of negatives for the Broncos. Their defensive front was great. Their getting after the passer was great. Their run stopping ability was great. Their secondary was great. Oh yeah, and having Patrick Surtain, defensive player of the year last year, being on your team is not a bad thing either. So with their first pick in the draft, they chose a corner to play alongside with Patrick Surtain. So you now have a number 1 drafted corner on your team and Patrick Surtain on the other side. Okay, that sounds a little scary, right? Oh yeah, but I also forgot to mention they added Hufanga from the 49ers, who's an all-pro. So it's hard to run the ball or pass the ball, especially when your defensive front led the league last season with 63 sacks, which also was a franchise record for them. Oh, and did I also mention they added Dre Greenlaw, who also is from the 49ers, at a linebacker position for them. So I think we collectively can see that like their additions through the draft, through free agency, to an already great defense is like fantastic. This team is going to be a team that is a nightmare for any offensive coordinator to face next season. And again, they very well could be number 1, but just based on the tape and what I saw last year, I had to give it to the next team on the list at number 1, but they're literally like, whoo, right there. So at number 1 is the Houston Texans. The Texans defense was vying as a top 2, top 3 defense in the NFL collectively. The other big thing too last season was that some of their quality starters and even just some of their like depth pieces were hurt on this defensive unit last season. They could have played at an even higher level had they all been healthy throughout the season, which I know is a big if. Over the last couple of years for DeMeco Ryans, he has not only improved this team holistically as a defense, he has decreased the amount of rush yards given up, pass yards given up, points given up. He is year over year improving this defensive unit, and I anticipate the same thing going into 2025. As far as the defensive front for the Texans goes, with Will Anderson and Daniel Hunter arguably being the best edge rusher combination in the NFL, you add in the likes of Azeez Al-Shaair and Henry To'oTo'o to this team, you have a defensive unit that's not going to let you run the ball and it's going to get after the passer. And whether it's the running back who has the ball, the wide receiver has the ball, or God forbid the quarterback who has the ball, you do not want to get tackled or hit by these players because they are going full speed every single play. When we look at the secondary for the Texans, it is more stacked, in my opinion, than any secondary in the NFL. You have Derek Stingley, Kamari Lassiter, Jalen Petrie. Like, that secondary is stacked. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention, they added CJ Gardner-Johnson from the Super Bowl winning Eagles last season. So if we can remove some of the injuries this season at the key positions, if CJ Gardner-Johnson can play at the same level he did last year for the Eagles, and if DeMeco Ryans can get this defense as a whole to take another step up, I do believe that in 2025, the Houston Texans will be the best defensive unit in the NFL. If you guys haven't seen the 6 through 10 rankings and you want to check that out as well, it should be around here somewhere. Hopefully this helps you get a little bit closer to winning your fantasy football championship in 2025. I would recommend taking one of these top 5 defenses when you draft, if you draft defenses. If you don't draft defenses, don't worry about it. Anyways though, hopefully you guys will see me again real soon. Until then, y'all have a blessed day.